In 1946, the Soviet envy of American buses resulted in the creation of the ZIS-154 transit bus. But as that vehicle was difficult to maintain, a shorter, more simplified bus with GM styling debuted in 1949. Originally meant as a temporary solution, it quickly became permanent and quite numerous. This is the story of the ZIS-155, the perfectly imperfect Soviet-American transit bus. Hi, this is Jeffrey. Now, not too long ago, I did a video on the ZIS-154 Soviet transit bus. Now, basically, aesthetically, the ZIS-154 was a copy of the American GM TDH-3610. However, the ZIS-154 turned out to be very complex and difficult to maintain. So they decided to try again, and the result was the ZIS-155. It was supposed to be a temporary solution, but it turned out to be quite permanent. It's a really interesting story, so let's get started in learning about the ZIS-155 Soviet transit bus. In the mid-1940s, there was a significant demand for city buses in the Soviet Union. To meet this need, ZIS, the oldest and one of that country's largest vehicle manufacturers, began production of the ZIS-154 transit bus in 1946. Contrary to popular belief, there was no license acquired from General Motors of Detroit to manufacture these buses by ZIS, but visually, at least, they appeared as copies of the American GM TDH-3610. After only 4 years and 1,165 units, production of the ZIS-154 came to an end. In addition, the bus had proven to be maintenance-intensive and technically complex in practice. To address these problems, the Central Automobile Repair Shops in Moscow, also known as ZARM, Z-A-R-M, built several prototypes of a new city bus based on the chassis of the ZIS-150 truck. By not adopting the diesel-electric drive of the ZIS-154, but instead installing a conventional gasoline engine with a manual transmission, the design could be significantly simplified. And so, prototypes of the new ZIS-155 were presented in 1949. Series production began shortly thereafter. Many parts and assemblies were borrowed from other vehicles, especially its predecessor and the ZIS-150 truck. The braking system and engine, for example, came from the ZIS-150, although the engine was slightly modified for the bus. The cooling system, with some improvements, came from the ZIS-154, as did many elements of its bodywork, including the American-esque GM styling. However, the body was about 1.25 meters shorter than its predecessor, making the two models easy to distinguish. Drivers therefore nicknamed the buses shorts. And the new bus would be 2 tons lighter than the previous model. Since it was immediately known that the bus would operate on both city and suburban routes, efforts were made to install as many seats as possible in its cabin. Double seats covered in dark brown artificial leather were installed on both sides of the bus, leaving an aisle of only 50 centimeters wide. In the front and back of the cabin, there were soft sofas across the entire width of the bus. The driver had a partitioned full-width cab, which could be accessed by a door on the off side, but often without a door inside the bus leading to the passenger area. As there were no modern fare boxes, fares were collected by a conductor sitting by the back door. The conductor sat on a small seat reserved for her, as they were usually women, and gave the driver a signal to close the door by pulling a cord on the right side of the cabin. Now, let's take a look at some of the basic specifications of the ZIS-155. Number 1, length is 8.26 meters. Number 2, width is 2.5 meters. Number 3, height is 3.11 meters. Number 4, number of seated passengers is up to 28 and can carry 24 standees. Number 5, empty weight is 6,290 kilograms with a total permissible weight of 10,190 kilograms. Number 6, engine is the ZIS-124 6-cylinder gasoline engine of 95 horsepower. And finally, number 7, top speed is 65 kilometers per hour. Initially, it was expected that the ZIS-155 would be a transitional, temporary model, so its shortcomings, steep steps, narrow passenger doors, noise, poor ventilation, and strong gas pollution of the driver's cabin due to the engine located in front on his right, also seemed temporary. Overall, it was a very imperfect bus. And according to Mikhail Andreev, an engineer at ZIS, of the engine placement in the ZIS-155.
The designers had to move the 6-cylinder engine to the right of the bus's longitudinal axis, as there would not have been enough space for the driver, who sat in the partitioned cab, which he entered through a separate door inconveniently located above the front wheel on the left side of the body. Unfortunately, such compromises while designing the bus had to be made.
There was at least one rear-engined 155, and a number of buses were exported and operated in Berlin, Warsaw, Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, Kabul, Afghanistan, and Beijing. And in 1952, an ambulance version of the ZIS-155 came into service. In the early 1950s, unusual trains appeared on the busiest routes of Moscow, Tbilisi, and other cities. The ZIS-155 bus without an engine, pulled by motorized ZIS-155s, and the MTB-82 trolleybus, also pulling a ZIS-155 trailer. It's also believed that a 12-seater trailer type 2PN-4 manufactured by Aramco's was also used in conjunction with a few 155s, but no photos of both vehicles together could be found. By 1957, more than 21,000 ZIS-155 buses were manufactured, far outstripping its predecessor and being replaced by the equally imperfect ZIL-158 in 1959. The ZIS-155 buses differed throughout its production in the decoration of the radiators, headlights, and the shape of the windows at the rear doors, and some other details of the exterior design. However, the branded herringbone remained unchanged, the ZIS emblem with a fluttering red Soviet flag against the backdrop of the silhouette of the Palace of Soviets. But for the average Soviet citizen, it was the temporary bus, which became quite permanent. And so there it is, the story of the ZIS-155, the last Soviet transit bus with American GM old-look styling. Now, there are a few ZIS-155s in existence. Some of them are in operating condition, while a few are used as monuments, which is a really cool thing. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at the ZIS-155. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye.